What's going on there, Workforce? Chris here with Work to Game, and today it is time for a community feedback, and this is where we go back and we look at one of the more recently done videos that's gotten a lot of feedback from you guys to kind of continue that conversation on. And today we'll be looking at the WoW versus Final Fantasy XIV flying, and kind of what you guys had to say about that. I think that the WoW versus Final Fantasy XIV series in general has gotten a lot of comments, and some of them are from people who have played both games, some are from people who have since switched from one to the other, and some are from people who have always played one and never really thought about the other one. So I think there's just a lot of interesting conversation here as you guys kind of figure out exactly what everything is. So let's dive in. So the first comment comes to us from Azura. I always struggle with that name, and there's two of you with similar names that comment quite a bit. So WoW equals map, Final Fantasy XIV equals zone, and that is one of the core issues here, is that there's this whole translation that has to take effect where, like, even when I'm talking about them, I constantly am saying, like, classes, job, map, zone, guild, gold. And so there's all of these things that they mean the same thing. There's abbreviations that get used that mean the same thing. When we jump into Party Finder, that's what a PUG or LFR or things like that are. These are all very similar terms. Sometimes they mean just a little bit different, but that has more to do with the differences of the games than that they came from a core different idea. So I just thought this was really interesting because in the comment section you can see where people will sometimes just totally miss each other as they say the same thing just for different games. So the next one comes to us from Chronoic. I think it comes down to this: does the game have world PvP or is it PvE? If it's world PvP, no flying is best, no mounts whatsoever is best. If the game has PvE, flying is fine, because flying just allows us to do the quest faster. So there is a big difference here, and world PvP is something WoW is looking to address for Battle for Azeroth. So without just lumping that entire franchise into one mentality, knowing it's going through a change, yes, PvP does allow people to act more cowardly. From a quest perspective, it does kind of ruin the pacing and the progression that somebody spent time designing. They design this beautiful experience where you have to kill a certain number of things, so that by the time you get to the boss, you feel like you've really earned it, and you go through this beautiful archway or whatever, and then it's like, nope, I just flew right over that, dropped in, killed the guy, flew out. So I think that it does ruin the pacing for a lot of things, PvP and PvE included. The thing about it not allowing us to mount in PvP, well, both games actually allow you to mount in their form of PvP, especially when you look at the size of PvP maps in the larger maps in Final Fantasy or things like Alterac Valley and WoW. You have these huge distances to cross, and so the mounts do matter, but I do understand what you're saying, that in typical arena-style combat, or when you're trying to fight somebody, you need to stop them from mounting. And both games do that by saying, well, you can't mount while you're combat flagged, and that's fine. But the question is, does flying mounts in general allow you to come in as strategically, especially when you talk about ganking? When you talk about high-level players coming in and just dropping out of the sky and killing somebody low-level for no reason. So I think it's a valid question about whether or not flying should be in the game. It's why some of the current designers over at WoW have tried to pull flying from the game, but they just can't do it because the player base won't take it. They'll just quit. So I think that it's an interesting question. This video, I mostly focused on what do they do different, but there is an honest question about whether or not MMOs need flying at all and whether or not they should have it. Once you gave it to us, I'm now not going to live without it. It just seems too good to be true. But if you honestly, you know, it's like being told you can have ice cream for dinner every night. I want it, but if I honestly sit down and objectively look at it, maybe it's not something I should have. So Patrick Overstreet writes, you know, I really want to try WoW, but everything I learn about it makes me not want to try it, and that legitimately makes me sad because I'd like to give it an honest shot, but all the systems I know just makes the game sound terrible. These are two very different MMOs, and they are number 1 and number 2, and there are other good MMOs outside of this. If the way one is currently played makes you not want to try it, and the one you are currently playing you're loving, then there is no reason to switch. It doesn't matter what game you're playing, it doesn't matter what game you're considering. If you like where you are and you're not sure they're doing anything better, don't switch. But really, like, the chance to compare these games and a chance to see how they're different is for those people who aren't happy where they are, or they've been on the fence, or they've got friends that play the other one. I think that there's honestly times in an MMO cycle where games are less fun to play just in general, and maybe that's the beginning of it for you. Maybe it's overwhelming, but they haven't, you know, there's still things that are gated, and so maybe it's the end where everything's is much easier to get, it's on this accelerated rate, and they're not really putting in the dev time because they're spinning up for the expansion, so they're just kind of tying up loose ends. I think that, you know, wherever that is, maybe it's mid-patch that's always just feels like it's a repetition to you. That's kind of where Final Fantasy Stormblood is right now. We're in a mid-patch, and so they're starting to introduce things that the previous expansion had that hadn't made it in yet, but they're not really doing a whole lot of innovation right now. They tried with Eureka, but it's very status quo, and it will stay that way, as opposed to WoW is in a late patch cycle right now. And so you're seeing everything is in these catch-up mechanics. They're making sure everybody's experienced everything, and they're trying to wrap up the story so it gears us up for the next 4 to 5 months to push over to a new expansion. And then there's that new expansion, like, where everything is new, everybody's in it together, but the markets are overinflated, there's crowded things. So, I mean, there's good and bad to each stage. And so one of the benefits of having 2 MMOs that you like, or 3 MMOs that you like, or whatever that is that if an MMO ever hits a cycle you don't like, you can always drop it and just play, oh, I play WoW mid-patch for Final Fantasy XIV. I play beginning, then I switch to WoW, then I come back for the end, play the beginning, switch to WoW, and you could do that. There's nothing wrong with that. So both of these games absolutely have enough catch-up mechanics in them that they want people to come back. Now, they both have ways for rewarding people who stick around. You know, so when you see somebody that has a whole bunch of stuff you have, that's somebody who's stuck with it year in, year out, forever. But if you don't feel like changing, don't change. Azure Arcade, there's our other Azure. I never even considered comparing these aspects of these games. I think Final Fantasy XIV does it better because of how seamlessly it feels. However, I do recall 1 or 2 currents being well off the beaten path in the very last area of Stormblood. I had my friends help me with those. Other than that, that was the only hiccup you had in gathering your currents. Remember what you remember of WoW, it's always been rep-based and kind of grindy and can get old rather quickly. Because of this and other factors, it wasn't worth it for me to reactivate my WoW account at this time unless I want months of grinding to catch up. So the great thing about catching up in any MMO is that every MMO totally hits the reset button every expansion, knowing that people might have skipped the last expansion. So you only ever have to grind whatever is current. It's like coming into Final Fantasy this patch, you don't have to go back and grab the last tome, you just have to grind Mendacity. And honestly, this close to 4.3, by the time you cap, Mendacity's probably already out, and we're on the 4.3 currency. In which case, now you don't have to grind this stuff. So I wouldn't worry about the grindiness of switching games. But where you talk about is, like, you hadn't thought about comparing these. They are very different. They are. And one of the things you're talking about here is currents. So the Aether currents, they're just hidden all over the place. And you have this little Aether compass that technically, it's kind of like the artifact system for WoW, where you tap a little thing, and this little basically compass tells you need roughly X direction, roughly this far. So I need to go east 150 yards. And both games have an item that does a similar mechanic for different aspects. WoW uses it for finding their little fossils, their little archaeology stuff, and Final Fantasy uses it for finding their Aether currents. So I think that's the problem with those things. Is anybody in archaeology that ever feels like, okay, I feel like I've passed it 6 times, that's what happens in WoW, and they're trying to hide these Aether currents where they're somewhere beautiful, like the chests in WoW, where it's like, okay, I found an add-on that tells me there's a chest in this area, but is it on the cliff above me? Is it in the cave below me? So the compass isn't perfect. It doesn't really tell you vertical or, vertical direction at all. It doesn't tell you up or down. It just tells you left, right, forward, backward. So you can get stuck on those last few, and then in WoW, it's just running to a part of the map that you don't have. But sometimes you see your little cursor running like off into this huge area you don't have, and you have to make it way far in there before it appears. So I don't know that either system is totally perfect in its current state, which I guess is why I wanted to compare them, because it's possible that one game has already solved the other game's problem, and it's possible that they're just different. So, I don't know. Seems interesting to me. Hope you guys are liking the series. Robert Parsons. There are a couple things I like about the WoW's flight system more. Once you have worked for flying, it's literally unlocked for your entire account, so you don't have to worry about it for that expansion ever again. I also love the freedom and smoothness of movement flying models have. Final Fantasy XIV's feel kind of slow and clunky, but you love the idea of Aether Currents. I also like how open world WoW's world is. One of the core differences between these games is load zones. So when you compartmentalize your zones, you can make them a lot more resource intensive. You can spend a lot more time really trying to make that zone feel like a unique experience, because it doesn't ever have to tie into the others. There doesn't really have to be a cliff that overlooks just right. There doesn't have to be anything. You can also really gate them behind either a certain story or anything like that. And then from a server infrastructure, I mean, they're treated a little bit differently, but the new WoW system can kind of instance each zone. So as you fly in, you're handed a shard. So that's very similar. But the world is a big key difference of this. Is the world open? Is the world not? And I don't know what you define as open world, because some of these zones in Final Fantasy have gotten huge, and WoW has gotten to the point where from a load screen perspective, they've fed you more Hearthstones than ever. And so I do spend a lot more time now instantly porting to things or using my whistle. So there's a lot more often that I'm going through I guess a jarring visual experience where I'm being teleported some distance. And there's either a load screen or there's an instant flash on the screen. So the pacing of the world and the openness of the world is one of the core differences between these games before you even talk about movement systems or anything like that. The fact that you like WoW system more because it's unlocked for your entire account, I wish it was unlocked for your entire account on Final Fantasy. I think it's not, because one character can have all the jobs, and so they don't really see a need for creating multiple characters. But for the few people that like to create multiple characters so they can either be on a friend's server that's on a different server cluster so they can level with them. You know, I have friends that have alts, so it's like, okay, that's what they do during their off time. Like when they feel that their main is all caught up, they'll come over here and they'll create an alt so they can re-experience story, they can re-experience all this stuff, or for RP reasons or things like that. I wish that you could kind of opt in or opt out to having access to that flying. From an RP standpoint, I guess it would make sense not to have flying unlocked on that character. And then the smoothness of the models. I think in general, WoW has the better model library, and I think that just comes from age. But there are a handful of models that are really well done in 14. The PvP Pegasus mount is my favorite, just from a smoothness. It's not the mount I always wanted, but then I got it and I was like, this is absolutely stunning. The most disappointing thing about that mount is how beautiful it is when it leaves the ground to fly, and that it's a mount given to you for PvP, so when you use it in PvP, you would never even know it had those wings because it doesn't ever fly, because you can't fly in PvP. So I think that smoothness, yes, that has a lot to do with how detailed Final Fantasy is. Final Fantasy is so much more detailed, it can't be perfect, as opposed to WoW with their more, I guess, cartoony graphic style. They can kind of fudge certain things like that and make it look just right. I don't know, interesting observation, just wanted to reference it. Thanks, Robert. Dimitrico, I know this is a Final Fantasy versus WoW video, but I just wanted to say Guild Wars 2 with the Griffin has the best flying mount of all time. Yes, there are other good games out there. I wish I could play them all, and I've gone on and looked at pictures and stuff of this. I haven't gone and looked for video, but Guild Wars 2 looks like a fascinating system, and I wish I could have be level cap just suddenly just to try flying for a day. I don't know, it's an intriguing system. It's hard to imagine getting to compare every MMO just from the sheer amount of time that each of these games wants, but just wanted to throw it up there in case any of the rest of you were like, oh, he's not talking about Guild Wars. Muja, I am surprised you didn't touch on the freedom of flying, which to me is a deal breaker in regards to who has the better flying, which based on that criteria, I would go to WoW. If you want to unmount anywhere in the world, no matter the height, you can land virtually anywhere you see. On a personal note, I've always felt I earn flying in WoW rather than have it given to me. Once you unlock Pathfinder, it unlocks account-wide. So one of the key issues with Pathfinder, and a few of you touched on this, is that it didn't feel grindy to you because you played from the beginning of the expansion. Certain parts of it were gated behind story, and I think that's something we will likely see in Battle for Azeroth based on the last 2 expansions and their view on flying, that they'll basically say, we're going to take a zone, and the progression in that zone is going to be set at a certain pace, and since flying is gated behind you completing the expansion's lore, the core lore, not anything tied to patches, but the core lore of the base expansion, since that's gated, therefore flying is gated. And so that's one of the interesting things about the way WoW is handling this. I do like that it paces it. I wish the pace was a little faster. Unlocking it felt more like a chore in one of them. In Final Fantasy there, based on your comment, I think they both felt like a chore to me, but I was late to WoW, so I think that some of my views may change early expansion in Battle for Azeroth. I don't know a cleaner time to start making these videos. Like, if I just start making Battle for Azeroth, people's complaining are like, well, you didn't play last expansion, so you don't know. So, I just had to get started. And so I think that when you talk about the pacing of the unlock, they're just different because it's 2 different design teams. They both had a whiteboard somewhere, and they both sat there and wrote on it and erased and wrote on it and erased until they had the core priority list, and then they designed a flying system around that priority list. The thing about the freedom of flying, there is a core difference in the way these zones are modeled and in the way they are designed. Final Fantasy, because they have the advantage of being broken into zones, we'll call it an advantage here, they have the ability to focus on the game only visually. And so that's not only higher graphics, but if you want something to feel epically tall, it can be epically tall. They can literally just push it to that height. But that means from a flying standpoint, it's going to be too steep to land on, or you're going to be having to fly above the flight ceiling to get to the top of it. And so that means inherently that the zone is designed for beauty and immersion first, and moving around second, especially from a flight standpoint. You don't need to be able to land on the top of a stone arch because there's nothing up there. So let's just make the stone arch beautiful. Now, the advantage of WoW's system, where everything is one big world all the time, is that everything is interactable. You can land just about anywhere. It is very rarely that you fall off something and you skid down far enough that you couldn't theoretically survive, especially if you had a slow fall mechanic available to you, like most classes do, or like the Druid Cat, or you use your kite, or whatever. So I think that there is a core difference there in the way their world is designed. I think that goes a lot deeper than just flying, but maybe I should have referenced it. It's an interesting point. I think I thought of it more as world design at the time, but, you know, as I read the comment, it does make sense that it does affect flying pretty heavily. So, thanks, Moose. And last up, Matthew Pedlar. Do people not use the Aether Compass? I never had a problem finding the Aether Currents and never felt I needed to Google anything. Both unlocks of flying can be done without Googling anything. They are both that straightforward. They are both that well documented in game. In WoW, it is literally just keep playing and it will give it to you eventually. In Final Fantasy, it is just keep playing and it will give you everything except the Aether Currents that you didn't happen to come across, and we're going to give you an in-game tool for that. So both games do not rely on add-ons or Google or Reddit or help or friends or anything. However, there are people who are going to get stuck on a piece, and the current way they're playing or the current direction they're looking is not going to be the fastest way to complete it. And so they do go to Google. And so I think that that's where Google comes in, and that's where guides comes in. That's where, honestly, Brian and I's channel comes in, is that, yes, could you just brute force until you had a way of doing things? Absolutely. But sometimes I would say that if you're new to the game and you're just trying to unlock Aether Currents as fast as possible, and you're not trying to have this immersive, I don't want to run out of game, because if you join the game just now, you're not going to run out. I mean, we're gonna have 5.0 before you ever catch up. So if you're just trying to push through content so that no one speed bump takes you longer than it should, then I would recommend finding Google or a guide or a friend or something like that if you're getting stuck. If something's taking longer than it's fun, then go ahead and use that use that search engine. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, the compass is in game, and WoW wants you to explore, but it gives you a map and shows you what areas aren't explored. So both games are very good about kind of feeding this to you. So anyway, thank you guys so much for all the comments. There was a lot more than just this. There was a lot of great conversation going back between you. Most of it was actually pretty respectful, which I appreciate. So I just wanted to kind of touch on a few things that kind of continue the conversation on, and then I'll be trying to go through and if you guys didn't see the new schedule that we posted this week that we're roughly trying to stick to, hopefully Wednesday mornings works for community feedback. So hopefully that's a time that we can go back and we can look at videos of the week and we can start to touch on feedback. Sometimes that'll be the most commented video, sometimes that'll just be one that was highly controversial. I'll typically try to stay within the last, I guess, like month on videos, unless an old topic just crops up. But that's kind of where that is. And then for those of you that didn't kind of join the channel before last year, you know that at the end of the year we did go through these and we started to look for comments of the year and things like that. We'll probably be only pulling those from community feedbacks, although we have a couple earmarked for us that we're just kind of saving them this year, and that's just a nice giveaway that we can do kind of at the end of at our channel anniversary. So welcome all the new people, and thank you guys so much for all the comments. This has been Chris with Work to Game. Hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for watching. YouTube has a pretty cool video waiting for you over here. Our latest vlog is down below. For those of you new, subscribe is over here, and all of our other contact info is just right below me here. Thanks for watching.